Okay, hey guys. So heroism. VR to Ron and to Ivan and Anthony's video, which I just saw this morning. So Ron asked specifically for examples of heroism or heroic play in RPGs, actual play. So I know he asked specifically not to define heroism, but I don't think I can appropriately respond if I don't give my own definition of what heroism is. And I'd like to build upon what Anthony and Ivan were going on, because I think they hit upon all the criteria that I use to define heroism. And well, so here it goes. So to me, heroism involves a couple of things. It's mainly a voluntary personal risk. You know, when somebody incurs a voluntary personal risk of injury or great cost to oneself, which has some reasonable chance of success, and that risk is taken in the benefit of other people. So all elements of that are important. It has to be voluntary. If, you know, there's a gun to your head, you're not really a hero. You're doing it because there's a gun to your head. It has to be personal risk. It has to be personal, you know, it has to mean something to you. If you don't really care, then you know, if you're risking somebody else's things, it doesn't really matter. You have to risk either injury or some sort of cost that you will personally pay, and it has to be significant, right? It can't be a little sacrifice. It has to have some reasonable chance of success, because if there's, you know, even if it's a little bit of chance of success, because if it's hopeless, then it's just a foolish act, right? There's a very thin line between heroism and foolishness, and the risk the assessment of your chances of success is an important process of that, right? If there's zero chance that whatever it is that you're going to do is going to succeed, it's just stupid. It's not heroic. And the last thing is that it has to be taken in the benefit of others. Okay, if you do it just for yourself, it's not really heroic. It's just a selfish act. Now, I think, because this is my definition, hey, let's go back to Ivan, right? This video is about me. So this is my definition. You have to meet all these criteria. If you have only partial elements of this, it doesn't really qualify. So, you know, for the second portion that I would consider in this analysis of whether an act is heroic or not is the degree of how heroic was it, and that's something that's can only be taken in retrospect, in hindsight, right? So after the action is completed, and you can analyze it, right? And the degree of heroism inherent in the action is going to be dependent on two things: either the degree of success or the degree of personal cost, right? If it's really, really successful and it doesn't cost you anything, it's still a big heroic act, right? Maybe you took a wild chance and you stormed a nest of German machine guns by yourself to protect your squad, and you got them all and you didn't get hurt. Well, you succeeded, and you didn't pay any cost at the end of the day. It's still a great heroic act. But again, it's because you did it for your buddies back there, right? On the other hand, if you fail, but you died, you know, it's still heroic. You were willing to try, at least try, right? It's not your fault that it failed. It's still a great heroic act. You gave your life trying to protect your buddies back there. And of course, the greatest, you know, not the greatest, but another great measure is if you died and succeeded, right? So you both paid the cost and you also succeeded. So anyway, but those things are after the fact. Those are analyzing the degree of how heroic it was. The worst case scenario is that you failed and you didn't pay any cost. It's still heroic. It's not as heroic as it could have been, but it's still heroic, but because you were willing to take the risk. Oh, I almost forgot to add one very important element in the definition. Again, it's an action where someone voluntarily decides to incur personal risk of injury or great cost to oneself, where there is at least some reasonable chance of success and is taken for the benefit of others, But the last part is very important too, without expectation of reward. Now, it's important that, if after you finish doing your heroic act, your next question is, what are you going to pay me for what I just did? Or, what are you going to give me now that I saved you? Or whatever it is that nullifies the heroism in the act. That's different from getting paid to do something. Like, it might be your job. Like, soldiers are getting paid. Doctors are getting paid. Firefighters are getting paid, right? You need money to live. So that's one thing, but when you take that extra risk, when you take that extra step, you do so without expecting extra compensation, right? It's okay to get paid. It's not okay to ask for more because you took a risk in that sense. So anyway, that's something I didn't want to leave out. So anyway, that's my definition. So for the benefit of Ron and whoever's here, just to hear the example, I'll proceed with some examples of what I consider heroic actions and heroic play in my recent gaming. So I just picked what I could remember from the last year, basically, because we've been doing this for a long time. So anyway, the first example that comes to mind is a game that I played with Jason Graham, was running a game of Blood and Bone, and I played with my friend Jose. And the characters that we were playing were Edrigo and Niall, which were our versions of like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. So, I'll say Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser for shorthand, so you understand the type of characters there were. Anyway, the situation was this. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser were coming up a mountain. This guy is about to go under the... we're supposed to help this guy. We need this NPC that we have to catch, right? So at some point there's a landslide, and the guy gets caught in the landslide and is about to slide off a cliff. So my character, Edrigo, the Grey Mouser equivalent, just runs after this guy who's about to go over the cliff. And I start running into the thing, and my character throws a rope back to Niall, the Fafhrd equivalent in this case, and ties it around his waist and goes, catch us, right? And then I have my character jump and dive and do a check to try to grab the guy before he falls over the cliff. So let's look at my criteria. It's voluntary. I didn't have to do it, so the guy could have gone over the cliff, and who cares, right? It's personal risk because my character is going to fall off the cliff if I fail, or if Niall doesn't catch the rope in time, or he fails the check, or he fails the strength check to catch us, right? So it's a personal risk, and the possible cost is death, right? So it's personal risk. There's a reasonable chance of success, right? Hey, the dice, it's a dexterity check. Maybe the dice will fall in my favor. It skirts the line of stupid because I don't really know the exact odds, right? This could be like, maybe it's a Hail Mary pass and I'm just being stupid. But I choose to believe that there's a small chance that a couple of dice rolls will come up our way and it'll work. And it's taken for the benefit of others, right? I'm trying to save the life of this guy who's about to slide off the cliff. Now, true, there's some self-interest as well. I want the guy alive, but I don't have to risk my life for this guy. So that's a pretty heroic act. Now, just for completeness sake, I'll point out that it did work. And Jose made, my friend Jose playing Niall made the strength check, and I made the dexterity check. So I caught the guy and Niall caught me, right? So he caught both of us. He put the rope around the tree trunk and anchored us and hauled us back in before we fell over the cliff. So, hey, it worked. But I don't, again, that would be to determine the degree of heroism, right? It's succeeded, so it's a great heroic act. Yay! Personal cost? Not really. Nothing happened to me. So, but hey, it's still a great heroic story. Or at least I'd like to think so. Okay, so now the other two examples have to do with our present Lamentations in Mars game that Ivan is running for us using Lamentations of the Flame Princess with a variant of the magic system. It's similar to the Vaginas or Magic Eldritch Cock system, It's kind of a variant of that, some house rules by Ivan. But the point is that the act of spell casting under certain circumstances is a risky act. Now, this could result in very little harm to you, or if the roll goes wrong, it could go really, really wrong for your character. You could even die. So that establishes that there is some risk. I'm playing Parthalion, who is a wizard. So he's a low-level wizard. So, many of the spells that he has access to a couple of very high-level spells. But casting, each time he tries to cast those, there's a huge risk involved, right? The higher the spell level, the higher the risk. So in one of our games, the party of people, Parthalion, the situation is this: Parthalion and the rest of the party are in a caravan trying to take these people who are part of the household of Parthalion. Let's call it the household of Parthalion, right? Who were lived in one city, and we were forced to go out into the Martian desert to go to another city looking for safeties. So we're like refugees, right? It's a refugee caravan. And Parthalion feels responsible for everybody in the caravan, including the other PCs, because Parthalion is sort of the owner of the house, owner of the villa. He has inherited this villa, so he feels responsible for everybody in it, right? So he wants to get the whole caravan safe to the other city. Now, the situation is that during the crossing of this desert, at one point, we get surrounded by these monstrous creatures that are going to kill us. And some of the other PCs attempt to attack the other creatures, and they're just getting mowed down. The creatures, I don't remember, they paralyzed them, or they completely neutralized like the first two PCs. So that's half our party right there. Half our party falls down in the first round of the first, the first two actions of the first round. Parthalion hasn't even acted by now. So, and there's a ton of these creatures. So the TPK is imminent, right? Okay, so let's examine what Parthalion does. Parthalion decides to cast the highest level spell he can, which is Shape Change, and turn himself into a dragon. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if I can pull this off, I can scare the monsters, right? I don't even need to attack them. Maybe the sight of the dragon will be enough. This is like being surrounded by a pack of animals. If I can scare the animals by showing them a bigger animal, maybe they run away and there's no TPK, right? And I can save the entire caravan. So let's look at my criteria again. It's voluntary? Yeah, it's voluntary. Nobody's holding a gun to my head. I could have used a spell to escape, so I didn't have to do it. Is it a personal risk? Yes, there is, because the spell level that I'm going to cast is too high. So I need to roll the dice, and there's a very good chance that I'm not going to make it. So, there is a risk of personal injury or great cost to oneself. Is there a reasonable chance of success? Yes. The dice, I needed like a 15 or a 16 on a D20 or something like that. So, it's still a risk. It's not a very high chance of success. That's what, 25% chance of success, something like that. So it's a big risk. And what is the cost? I could die. I could get permanently turned into a dragon. I could permanently get turned into something else, and I lose the character, right? So why am I taking the risk? Well, I'm taking it in the benefit of the caravan and the rest of the players, because I don't want them to die either. So it fulfills all my criteria for heroism. Again, in the interest of completing the story, the spell check, I rolled it with the camera on the dice because I didn't want to even have the possibility of people thinking that I was cheating. So I rolled it live on the camera, and it turned up an 18. So I did succeed, and I did turn into a dragon, and I did scare the enemy away, so nobody died. So, with my analysis of how heroic was the act, well, it succeeded greatly, so it was a great success. Did it incur cost to me? No, but it still succeeded, so it still counts. If I had died and failed, or say maybe turned into the dragon and become permanently a dragon and lost my mind and therefore lost my character, I would call it a success, right? So it's still a heroic act, because I risked everything to save the guys. So that's it. Okay, so now the third and final example is again Parthalion in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, in a more recent game. The situation is the same refugee caravan has taken refuge in a series of caverns, and there is a sandstorm outside, so we're trapped inside these caverns with these people who initially seem very nice to us, but turn out to be psychotic killers that want to capture our entire caravan and feed us to their gods, right? So it turns ugly real quick, and we're trapped in here. We can't escape. They start sending hordes of these people against us, and it's up to the heroes to stop them, right? So in the first round of this combat, we get a bunch of people coming at us, and we cast some spells which go awfully wrong. Again, this risky spell casting. And somebody casts a wall of iron, and the wall of iron gets cast behind us. So it effectively traps Barthalion, Josimba, who is another spellcaster, and Thane, who is a fighter. It traps us between the incoming hordes and the rest of the party and the caravan, right? So at this point, it looks like our 3 characters are going to die, because the 3 characters in front of the iron wall are heroes, are not heroes, are PCs, right? So we're going to die. So that's where we left it. It was a cliffhanger. So all week I was thinking, what can I do? How can I help? How can I get us out of this mess? And it again dawns on me that it's probably a moment to cast one of those 9th level spells that I have, maybe Shape Change again, or maybe Prismatic. I think I have Prismatic Ray or Symbol. I had Symbol, which is good because you can inscribe a symbol and then kill a bunch of people with it. But then I'm thinking, do I save the guys in the process? Can I save the guys in the process? And I figure I can still safely cast one invisibility spell, and Josimba can cast invisibility for himself. So all through the week, I'm thinking, okay, the decision is this. This is what I'm going to do. When the next wave of attackers comes in, I am going to hand my spellbook to Thane, the fighter, and I'm going to tell him to get himself and the rest of the caravan to safety. I will cast invisibility on him. I'll tell Josimba to get the hell out of there. And I will risk everything on this 8th or 9th level spell, which is going to come at a very steep penalty to cast. So we're looking at less than 50% chance of success, right? It's probably going to be even less than the first shape change that I cast, because I cast that shape change in the most optimal of conditions. So we're looking at like a 10% chance of absolute success here. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. You know, I could risk everything for a less than 10% chance. So, you know, it's a voluntary thing. Nobody's forcing me to do it. I could cast invisibility on myself and try to get myself out of problems. No risk involved. That's the last spell I can cast in the day without risk. And I could leave Thane and Josimba to fend for themselves, right? It's a great personal risk because, again, the spell could backfire. It could kill me. It could kill everyone. It could kill my friends even. But, you know, it's what I'm thinking. It's worth a shot. It's a reasonable chance of success. Well, it's not 0. It's maybe a Hail Mary, but it's not 0. And I am taking it for the benefit of Thane and Josimba. So that qualifies as a heroic act. Now, as it turns out, for the full disclosure here and to, you know, close it up nicely, we never got into the situation because we were waiting for the next wave, and the next wave never materialized, right? Circumstances changed. What turned out to be happening was that the cave dwellers' gods woke up, and when they didn't present the appropriate sacrifice, meaning us, the gods turned and killed them in return. We still had some difficulty in escaping the caverns, but I wasn't actually thrust in the situation to go for the heroic act. So that's it. Those are my 3 examples. So if that's all you wanted, you know, feel free to check out, because now I want to talk about some things that Anthony and Ivan talked about in their video. Let me get my notes here. Okay, so Ivan brought up a very interesting point, which is risk to the player or risk to the PC. Now, I already mentioned that that's one of the important criteria, right? There has to be a personal risk attached. And I would like to say that, you know, you can still have the experience of the heroic play if it's just the character incurring the risk, right? If you're not super attached to the character, it's still a heroic moment. even though it's not a personal cost to the player, it's still a personal cost to the character. So there is an experience to be had. It may not be as full or as rich or as cathartic as when it is the player making the personal sacrifice, but hey, it's a game, and it's still a simulation of that, right? Of course, it is much more memorable and much more lasting and emotional when you are attached to the character. So whatever risk the character takes, it feels like you're taking it yourself as the player. So of course there's a difference, but you can still have both types of play, right? It's still a heroic experience, or so I think. It's important to note there is an example which is not mine, and apparently it's in one of those Matt Mercer games, which I don't watch. I don't even remember the name of it. You all know Matt Mercer. You know who he is. I only know of it because Matthew Colville mentions it in one of his episodes where he's talking about the Matt Mercer game and speaking how one of the players in Matt Mercer's games realizes at some point during the climactic last boss fight that he has access to, I think it was a wish spell or something, and he was planning on using it to resurrect or to help a fellow player regain his character, because he knows the other player really liked his character, but he realizes that the only way he can save the rest of the party is to actually cast the wish in combat. And if I think it was a scroll or something, so once he casts it, it's gone. So it's a one-shot opportunity that he has to take. And so he eventually decides to cast it to save the party, right? So he prioritizes the lives of everyone else over this one single character, which he had planned to help. And apparently it was a very emotional thing. The way Matt Colville describes it, it was the player was crying and everything. Not the guy whose player character was dead. It was the guy who had to make the choice, right? He was crying because he felt really bad that he had let down one of his fellow players in the interest of saving the rest of the party. So that's an example of the player hero, right? Player and player character hero. Anyway, it's a tough choice. I guess you guys probably know more about it than I do. So, okay, so the last point that I want to mention is at some point, Ivan and Anthony start talking about the situation where doing the thing is your job. And if that's heroic or not. And I would like to maybe illustrate the difference in that, talking about doctors and firefighters. I don't know many firefighters, but I know a crap ton of doctors. And I think the criterion comes down to, instead of cost, which is what Ivan brings up, it's risk. It's personal risk. How much risk are you willing to incur in what you do? You know, to what point does it stop being your job and start being a personal risk to your health? So, you know, if a surgeon comes in and operates on you and saves your life in the process, it's his job, and he's glad to do it. And that's all fine and dandy, but there's no real risk to the surgeon for doing that. There is some cost. Maybe he misses his kid's soccer game that morning. Maybe he loses a night of sleep because he's operating on you all night. And then he has to work the next day. And so there is a personal cost, but there's no personal risk. So I wouldn't say that's heroic. If you talk to any surgeon, they don't consider themselves heroes under most circumstances. Now, contrast that with a firefighter. Going into a house to save the baby from the burning building is always a heroic act. Because there's always, again, let's look at my criteria. It's always voluntary. You don't really, I know it's your job, but there's nobody holding a gun to your head when the building is all on fire. You could stay outside and spray it and hopefully see if you can save the baby, right? It's great personal risk. You could die doing that. The building could collapse on your head. You could catch fire, whatever it is, you could die. And, you know, is there a reasonable chance of success? They don't always go into the building They usually try, but sometimes it's hopeless, right? So they don't even try. And it is always taken in the benefit of others, right? So it's more likely anytime they go into the burning building for any reason, it's already heroic because they are risking their lives. Now, coming back to the doctors, just in case, I don't want to get any doctors mad at me, because I do remember the time back before 1997, back before the triple cocktail came out, and there was always the risk of catching HIV, which prior to 1997 was pretty much a death sentence. I know about this. I have some experience with HIV and AIDS patients, and every day was a personal risk to you. Any patient, when you work in the health science departments, you are always exposed to contagious diseases, right? A lot of those is just, okay, so you catch, measles, or you catch chickenpox or something like that. So it's not fun, and it is a risk, and you could pass it on to your family, which is not cool. So there is a risk involved, but back before 97, you risk death intervening with a lot of patients, particularly trauma patients, or anytime you had to draw blood or do a surgical or invasive procedure on patients, you were risking your life. So prior to 1997, most things that a lot of doctors did was risking their lives. So in that sense, there was a lot of heroic actions being done, at least prior to 1997. There are still risks like that being taken every day. It's still not fun to catch a contagious disease, and it's still a risk that you take every day. So in that sense, yes, it is your job, but you don't actually have to do it. And yes, you are risking something every day. So even today, if you get operated for appendicitis, the doctor could be risking his life. The surgeon could be risking his life to save you, or at least his health. So it is heroic as well. How much risk they feel they are exposed to is something you'd have to ask every firefighter and every doctor, because every situation is different. But I just wanted to illustrate the point that even though something is your job, there are limits, right? And if your job, being a cop, being a soldier, being whatever it is, involves risk to your life or health, I think, by my criteria, that even though that's the job you chose, it's still a heroic act. You chose to be a hero. So that's it, guys. That's where I'm going to leave it, and I hope this is hopeful to somebody. So keep the videos coming. Bye-bye.